Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse witch, and today we will talk about a very much requested topic. I have been asked about this topic over and over and over, and finally I settled down to do some thorough research, and now I can finally present you a video on Fylgjur. So we will talk today about things like what even is a Fylgja, are there different kinds of Fylgjur, what is the difference between a Fylgja, a Hamingja and a dis, or for example, how do I find out what my Fylgja is, or do I have a Fylgja, does everyone have one, how do I connect with it, how can I incorporate into any kinds of magical workings. Let's talk about that. But before, I have a quick little announcement to make, and that is that my Patreon is finally relaunching. If you have watched my content for a while now, you probably know that I have a Patreon, but it's actually kind of inactive, and it has been kind of inactive since June or July, somewhere around there. I have not really been posting anything there apart from early access to my videos, and that is because I didn't really have a proper plan on what I wanted to do with the Patreon and where I wanted it to go. So I just constantly thought, I have to post something, I have to post something, I have to post something. And that very fast sent me spiraling into a burnout, and I had to take a step back from it for a couple of months. And first of all, I want to say thank you so much to all of my Patreons who have stuck around, because actually only quite a few unsubscribed. And I don't want to shame anyone for unsubscribing. I mean, the Patreon is there for support, yes, but also because you are getting something out of it too. And if you don't get anything out of it anymore, why should you stay subscribed? So totally fine if anyone unsubscribed, but quite a lot of you stayed on my Patreon, and I am so thankful for that. I'm so grateful. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much to all of you. But now let us talk about where my Patreon is going. I will restart it on January 1st because I thought New Year's is a perfect time to relaunch it. And I have finally thought about content that, in my opinion, is pretty good for the amount that you're paying, but it's not so much that it will send me into burnout again, because it would not make sense for me to try to get out as much content as I can, but then to burn out again very quickly and stop posting altogether again. So I will keep my €1, €3 and €5 tiers. The €1 tier has always been the same, and it will always stay the same. It's a tier for only support, so there's nothing you get out of it. It's only for people who only want to support me and who don't really care about anything that they get through the Patreon. And there is, though, of course, tiers where you get something in return. First of all is the €3 tier, so this is basically like the base tier. And there is, of course, for example, a Discord access included to my private Discord, which is very fun. We also do, for example, book clubs and rune journeys on there. And if you have some other suggestions on some fun stuff that we could host on the Discord, feel free. But yes, the Discord access is included in the €3 tier. Also, things like, for example, the early video access. So you will see all of my videos 2 to 4 weeks before they actually go live. Something that's also included is Q&A priority. So, of course, if I film Q&As, I can't always answer all the questions because there are simply too many. But I am always making sure to always reply to the Q&A questions from my Patreons. So that priority is included in the €3 tier, as is a power over what I'm posting. So my plan is to once a month ask all of my €3 and up Patreons what they want to see on my channel. From all those suggestions, I will make a poll. Yeah, the suggestion that wins the poll, I will make a video on. So if you want power over what I'm posting, then maybe subscribe to my Patreon. And then lastly, something else included in the €3 tier is a monthly rune spread. That is something that my current patrons requested. And I thought, since I'm now posting my new moon and full moon videos publicly on YouTube, which previously I did in text form on Patreon only, I thought I still want to do something for the full and new moons because I think that's fun. So what I decided on is that I will look at what new moon is in that month. So for example, in January, we have a new moon in Capricorn. So what you will get in January is a rune spread specifically for that new moon in Capricorn. Some kind of rune spread that makes sense for that new moon. So that is everything that's included in the €3 tier. In my opinion, that's already quite a lot, but it's still manageable for me. And then we go to the €5 tier. We have 2 more things in the €5 tier, but of course, everything that the €3 tier gets, the €5 tier gets also. But additionally to everything that the €3 tier gets, the €5 tier also gets, of course, the patron shoutout that was always in the €5 tier and it will stay there. And additionally to the rune spread for that month's new moon, the €5 tier will also get a spell or ritual or a guided meditation or something that makes sense with that full moon of that month. So for example, if it's, I don't know, a full moon in Sagittarius that month, then maybe you will get a guided meditation. Or if it's a full moon in Gemini, then maybe it will be a communication spell. The full moon stuff will be either like a spell or a ritual or a guided meditation, anything that makes sense with that month's full moon. And I will make sure to explain everything thoroughly. So in case you are a beginner, it doesn't matter, because I will make sure to describe everything so thoroughly that even a beginner can do it. And that is everything that will be included in my relaunching Patreon. I am very, very excited about that. If you are interested in that, if you want to try it out, make sure to subscribe to my Patreon. The link is always in the video description. And oh yeah, by the way, I will always post all of the content on the first day in the month. So I won't post it randomly around the month. It will all be up on the first of that month. Okay, first of all, before we properly hop in, all of the sources that I'm working off of here are in the video description. So if you want to check out the original material, if you want to read through all of the papers and stuff, then I have put them in the video description. So make sure to check them out. They were all very, very good. First of all, if we're talking about the Fylgja, there is not really the Fylgja, because scholars mostly differentiate between 2 different types of Fylgjur. By the way, Fylgja, singular, Fylgjur, plural. And there are 2 different types. So we have on the one side the Animal Fylgja, and on the other side we have the human/woman Fylgja, also a lot of the times called Fylgjukona. So Fylgja, woman, basically. Kona is woman. And these 2 have actually very little in common apart from their name. But what does Fylgja actually mean? So if you look at the verb the Fylgja in Old Norse, it means something like to accompany, to follow, to help, or to belong to. And if we look at the noun Fylgja, for example, in modern Icelandic, it exists. It means either a spirit that inseparably follows a person, or, funnily, placenta, which of course makes sense if you think about what a placenta is. The placenta follows the newborn child out of the body. So it is a follower. And if we apply that same context to a Fylgja, that is basically what a Fylgja is. A Fylgja is an attendant or a following spirit. And it can be either an animal or a woman or a human. But let us talk about the separate types of Fylgjur. First of all, the Animal Fylgja. That is probably the Fylgja that most people think of when they talk about a Fylgja. It's often talked about and it's kind of put into the same category as like a Norse pagan spirit animal or something like that. And to be honest, it's not actually that far off from at least what I know about like spirit animals and stuff. An Animal Fylgja is kind of like an animal double of the individual. So first of all, every single person has a Fylgja. You out there have a Fylgja. That is a question that I've been asked a lot of the times. Do I even have a Fylgja? Or how do I know if I have one? Everybody has an Animal Fylgja. And this kind of spirit is basically a mirror that shows like the character or the rank of the person. So if you, for example, look at the sagas where Animal Fylgjur are mentioned, we see, for example, that chiefs a lot of the times have oxen as a Fylgja. A person that is especially sly has like a fox. A smaller person has a smaller animal. A peaceful person may have a goat. And kings a lot of the times have lions as an Animal Fylgja. It doesn't necessarily have to be an animal that exists in like the area where you live in. It only has to be an animal that has a specific significance that shows the character or the rank of the person. A lion doesn't live in Iceland, but still Icelandic sagas show kings with a lion as a Fylgja. Icelanders knew about lion existing and what they signify basically. My question though, and I actually could not get this question answered through my research, usually the sagas that describe a Fylgja are through an onlooker's perspective. So a third person says, okay, this person has a lion as a Fylgja. What if two people, maybe they come from different cultures that have just different views on specific animals. What if those two people look at the same person and they both see the Fylgja of that person? Do they see different animals because they associate different things with different animals? Or will they still see the same animal? Because I kind of feel like they would see different animals. Kind of like you would see different colors in an aura if you have different associations with the colors. But I could not get that answered through my research, so I don't know. But I think that was very interesting. The Animal Fylgja is also very closely attached to the individual. It's sometimes also seen as a part of the soul of that person because it is actually born with the person and dies when the person dies. So it accompanies the person or the individual from birth on until death. But it is not passed along to someone else. It's born with you and it dies with you. So it's kind of so closely attached to you that it could kind of be seen as a part of your soul. If you look at the sagas, then you also see that if an Animal Fylgja dies while the human is still alive, the human will also die soon. So they kind of really mirror each other. It's not only that if the human dies, the Fylgja dies, but it's also the other way around. So their fates are very, very much tied to each other. But that being said, the Animal Fylgja is also only a mirror of the person. If we look at stories about an Animal Fylgja, they don't usually have their own agenda, they don't really have their own will, they don't do anything by themselves, so they really just seem to be the character and the rank of the person mirrored in the other realms as some kind of animal spirit, but they don't really act independently from the individual. And then lastly, because that is usually what people are very interested in, who can see an Animal Fylgja? Like, how can I figure out what it is? How you can figure it out, I will talk about later, but who can see it? If we look at the stories, then we see either that clairvoyant people can see another person's Fylgja, and that are a lot of the stories. Like, a lot of the times it's clairvoyant people who either see the Animal Fylgja actually approach before the person comes. So for example, a wife will see the Animal Fylgja of their husband enter the house before the husband comes. So there is a signal that the person will come soon. So clairvoyant people can definitely see the Animal Fylgjur of other people. So that would be definitely one way how you could figure out what your Fylgja is. If you yourself see your Fylgja though, your Animal Fylgja, that's a different kind of story. If a clairvoyant person sees your Fylgja, not a problem, they just see it and that's it. If a person, an individual, sees their own Fylgja in their dreams, it's usually a bad omen, it's usually a warning of some kind. And even worse, if an individual sees their own Fylgja during their waking hours, so not while they're dreaming, it's usually a sign of death. So you probably don't want to see your own Fylgja either way. I personally feel like you can do it in a safe way, but like if you did not initiate it yourself and you just see your Fylgja randomly in a dream or during your waking hours, probably not the best sign. Alrighty, so now that we've talked about Animal Fylgjur, let us talk now about the woman Fylgja or the Fylgjukona. This one is quite different to the Animal Fylgja. As I already said, these don't really have a lot in common. While the Animal Fylgja has an animal shape, the Fylgjukona has a woman shape or a human shape. One thing that I'm asking myself though is it really always a woman, or is it actually just a different gender than the gender of the individual? Because if we look at the sagas, I don't know of a single story where we see the Fylgjur of a woman. We only have stories about the Fylgjur of a man. So I don't know, could they also be men or queer people? I don't know. We only have stories though about women or woman-shaped fylgjur, so that is what they're called, fylgjukonur. So let's just move on with that. So these fylgjukonur are also not only always one. Sometimes a person has multiple, or sometimes I guess a person has none. So I would guess that not every single person on this planet has a woman Fylgja. They could have 0, they could have multiple. If it's multiple though, then it's usually 9, because of course it's 9. The Fylgjukona is also not just a mirror of the individual it is attached to. It's not really a soul part, it's more of a really separate spirit. While she could attach herself to the individual, it's not necessarily so that she's born with the individual, and it's not necessarily the case that she dies with the individual. Usually, or at least there are a lot of stories of Fylgjukonur being passed on down the family line. So if you have a Fylgjukona that has attached herself to you in your life, and you die, and you have children, it's very possible that that Fylgjukona will be passed on to one of your children. So yeah, as I said, I would personally see the Animal Fylgja as more of a part of the soul of a person, because it's only a mirror, whereas a Fylgjukona is more of a separate spirit. It has its own agenda, its own will, and it acts independently from the individual or the person that the Fylgjukona is attached to. It's usually beneficial though, at least like if we look at pre-Christian Scandinavian stories, the Fylgjukona is usually beneficial to the person. Most of the times we have stories of them protecting the person that they are with, or sometimes even attacking their enemies. And that's why they're usually also referred to as guardian spirits. And then lastly, I already kind of spoiled that topic, but Fylgjukonur actually overlap quite a lot with Hamingja and Disir. So that is what I would like to talk about next. Where is the difference between a Hamingja, a Fylgjukona, and a Dis? If you read the sagas and you read about Fylgjur, Hamingja, Disir, it can be insanely confusing, because the names kind of seem to be used interchangeably sometimes, the concepts kind of seem to overlap, so it's not really clear-cut. It's not like you read a story about a Fylgja and you know exactly what it is, and you read another story about a Hamingja and you know exactly what that is. It kind of needs some research to kind of be able to differentiate between these three, and some people don't even do that. So you will sometimes read that Hamingja and Fylgja, for example, are just different names for the same thing. Are they though? Like, I tried to do some research into that, and while they seem to overlap quite strongly and sometimes the names are kind of used interchangeably, they still seem to be different things. A Hamingja, for example, first of all, we should probably talk about what a Hamingja is. A Hamingja is also a spirit that also accompanies a person, and it usually brings them luck. So it's very beneficial, it kind of brings them luck. And we have stories where, for example, if the person loses their Hamingja, they lose their luck. So it's a very, very bad thing to lose your Hamingja. And of course, if you look at the Fylgjukona is usually beneficial to the person. So of course, if you would lose them or they would die, then of course that would be bad for you. So are they the same thing? Because yeah, both are beneficial to the individual, both attach themselves to a person, and if the person loses that spirit, it is bad for them, because they lose their luck or their beneficent qualities. So are they the same thing? I would personally say from the research that I've done now that they are not the same. Because if you, for example, look at Hamingja, something that is very interesting about Hamingja is that a person can give their Hamingja away to a different person. So that there is, for example, a story where a person gives away their Hamingja to another person because they need it more. So they are basically giving away their luck to another person. With Fylgjur, those kinds of concepts don't really exist. You can't give away your Fylgja because they are attached to you. That doesn't really work. Also, if we look more at the linguistic side, there are concepts of luck that are called different things. So for example, we have Heitla, Giptu, Gevu, and Hamingja, which are always used in some kind of concept that have to do something with luck. And we have, or there are names that lucky people are called. And those names are, for example, I have to read them, sorry. Heitla-maður, Giptu-maður, Geifu-maður, or Hamingju-maður. So it's always kind of some kind of lucky man. What does not exist though is the name Fylgjumaður. That doesn't exist as a word for a lucky man. So it kind of seems like all of these other kinds of concepts for luck are all used in this way to describe a lucky person, but Fylgja is not. Fylgja is used in different kinds of contexts. These two reasons kind of seem to me to point to the fact that Hamingja and Fylgja are still separate things. While they may be both beneficial to the individual, they are still kind of different types of spirits or different types of concepts or beings. And now let's look at Fylgjur versus Disir, because this is also very interesting. If we look at the concept of a dis or Disir, we see this concept or this word used in very, very different kinds of contexts. We sometimes even see it used to describe a goddess. So for example, Freyja is sometimes called Vanadis. So a dis, it kind of seems to be some kind of umbrella term for supernatural beings or for goddesses. And just like Hamingja and Fylgja, the terms are kind of used interchangeably sometimes. So sometimes what seems to be, like from the context, seems to be a Fylgja is called a dis in that story. Since, again, as I said, the word dis or disir are used in vastly different kinds of contexts for vastly different kinds of spiritual beings, I would personally think that the disir are just a group of supernatural beings or goddesses. The context is always a feminine spirit, that is important. So, of course, a Fylgjukona, which is a feminine spirit, would also fall under the umbrella of the disir. But, for example, a Norn, which they are also always feminine, they would also fall under the umbrella disir. Or a Valkyrie, for example, or a goddess, they would also all fall under the umbrella of the disir. They just have kind of different specialties. So for example, a Valkyrie would be a dis, so some kind of feminine supernatural being that selects the ones to fall in battle. Whereas a Norn would be also a dis, because it's a feminine supernatural being, but with a different specialty because they decide fate. Or a Fylgja would also be a dis, but again, a different specialty because they are an attendant spirit who is beneficial and protects the individual that they are attached to. I know it's kind of complicated, like spiritual beings, supernatural beings in Norse paganism, in the Norse myths and the sagas. They're so insanely difficult to differentiate. They overlap a lot, so it's a little bit difficult. But this is at least what I think the differentiation between these kinds of beings is. Again, different people see it different ways. The pre-Christian Scandinavians didn't give us a dictionary where we could look up what a Fylgja is versus what a Hamingja is. That doesn't exist. We kind of have to figure out where the differentiation is. So, of course, different people will probably come to different results. That is just how I personally like to see it. Okay, by now we have only talked about Fylgjur in pre-Christian Scandinavia though. They didn't just cease to exist after the conversion, which I think is very interesting. If you watch my content, you know that I'm currently getting very much into Scandinavian folklore and also more modern Scandinavian folklore, not only pre-Christian Scandinavian one. So, what was the Fylgjur's fate after the conversion? It seems to have gone different ways for the different types of Fylgjur. If we look at Animal Fylgjur, for example, the concept seems to have not really changed after the conversion, but it has gotten a new name. If we look at more modern Scandinavian folklore, for example, I have stories from the 18th, 19th and 20th century, the Animal Fylgjur seem to not really have changed. They have gotten a new name though. In Norwegian, and sorry I don't speak neither Norwegian nor Swedish, but in Norwegian they're called Vardøger and in Swedish Vort. And this concept seems to have merged with the concept of the Animal Fylgja, or it's just a new name for it. I don't necessarily know, but the concept seems to be exactly the same thing. So we still have stories about how to figure out what your Animal Fylgja is. We have stories about people seeing the Fylgja first, like the Animal Fylgja first, before they see the person arrive. Things like that. The stories are basically the same thing, they're just more modern, but the concept is still exactly the same. If we look at woman Fylgjur though, Fylgjukonur, they seem to have suffered a worse fate. I don't know why. Maybe because it's women and women were bad. I don't know. But they seem to have suffered a worse fate than the Animal Fylgja, because if we look at post-conversion stories about Fylgjur, and not Animal Fylgjur, but Fylgjukonur types of beings, they are not beneficial anymore. They are still attendant spirits, they are still attached to a family line or an individual, but they're not beneficial anymore. They're kind of more like hauntings or sendings, so they're either a spirit that attaches themselves to a family line or an individual to haunt them, and they're usually pretty detrimental to them, or they're a spirit that is sent by a magical practitioner or by another person, just by being envious, for example, and that spirit is sent to an individual or a family and again haunts them. So they're either like just hauntings by themselves or kind of like a hex or a curse. And that is very different to the guardian spirits that we see from pre-Christian Scandinavia. I don't know why, but Animal Fylgjur seem to have been unchanged after conversion, but the women Fylgjur are now not beneficial anymore. They're more of hauntings. Okay, lastly though, the thing that you're probably all here for, which is, what does that mean for me in modern times? Questions that I'm always getting asked are, for example, do I have a Fylgja? How do I know what my Animal Fylgja is? What does it mean if I see them? How can I see them? How can I meet them? How can I connect with them? Can I include them into my veneration practice? Can I worship them? Should I worship them? Can I include them into my magical workings? All kinds of questions like that. Let us tackle them. First of all, before I dive into this, most of these questions are not answered by the sagas or by more modern folklore. A lot of the things that I will say here is just my personal opinion and my personal view. So if you were just here for the historically accurate stuff and the things that you will be able to verify in the sagas or in folklore, then yes, some of this will be answered by folklore and by the sagas, but most of it is not. Let's look at the first question though. Do I have a Fylgja? That is one question that's possible to answer from the sagas and from folklore. Everyone seems to have an Animal Fylgja, but not everyone seems to have a Fylgjukona. It's possible that you don't have one, it's possible that you have one, it's possible that you have multiple. That's something I already went over. Then we have the question of, how do I know if I have one? So of course, doesn't apply to an Animal Fylgja because everyone has one. But how do I know if a woman Fylgja, a Fylgjukona, is accompanying me, or even multiple? How do I know that? That is something that is sadly not covered by the sagas or by folklore, but I would personally say divination would probably be your best friend here, or maybe spirit flight. Of course, if you are doing some kind of trance journeying, I would guess that during these kinds of journeys you could meet them, or you could ask that they would reveal themselves to you. I personally feel like since they are spirits that are accompanying you, they are constantly around you, why should you not be able to see them? If you are clairvoyant, I would also say that you should be able to see them, because why should you be able to see other kinds of spirits but not your Fylgjukona or Fylgjukonur if you have multiple? And if you can, for example, figure out if there is a god or a goddess that is interested in doing some kind of work with you, why should you not be able to use divination to figure out if some kind of Fylgjukona or multiple Fylgjukonur have attached themselves to you? So I would personally say spirit flight, or in general trance journeying, or being clairvoyant, or just doing divination. I feel like those three should be able to reveal to you if you have Fylgjukonur that are attached to you. Another question that is actually answered by the sagas and by folklore is, how do I know what animal my Animal Fylgja is? For example, how did I know that my Animal Fylgja is a lynx? I was told by a clairvoyant friend, and I also saw it during trance journeying. So the trance journeying part is a modern thing, that is not something that comes from the sagas, but I personally think if you go on some kind of trance journey and you look into a mirror, or a kind of reflective surface, could also be a water surface or something, then you could see what your Animal Fylgja is, or you could maybe see it accompanying you. You could see it walking next to you, behind you, in front of you. So I feel like if you want to, then you can also figure that out while doing some kind of trance journeying. What we know from the sagas and from folklore is, for example, that clairvoyant people can see your Fylgja. So if you know someone who is clairvoyant, you can ask them, of course. There is actually a story from more modern folklore, and I will read that to you because I think that was very interesting. This one is about the vardøger. As I said, they overlap. The vardøger is an animal that accompanies or precedes you. If you want to know what kind of vardøger you have, there is a way to find out. You take your sheath knife, roll it up in a kerchief, and wrap it tightly. Then you pass this bundle from hand to hand, first in front of you, then behind you, 3 times. While moving the bundle, you say, "A horse as a vardøger." If your vardøger is a horse, the knife will lie outside of the kerchief by the time you have passed it the 3rd time. If it is not a horse, the knife will be wrapped in the kerchief. You proceed this way until you discover your vardøger, naming animal after animal until you find the right one. This one could take quite some time, because of course, if you are not guessing correctly the first few times, you have to do it another time and another time and another time with every single animal that you could think of. But apparently, by doing that, you can find out what kind of animal it is. A very interesting question, I think, is, should I venerate my Fylgja? Should I represent it on my altar? Should I give it offerings? Things like that. Of course, this is also not something that we can read about in the sagas and in folklore. At least I did not find any stories about that. So apparently, at least, we don't know if it was done. It could have been done. And since they are disir, there were disuploads. So maybe they were included in those kinds of sacrificial rituals. But I personally don't know about rituals that were specifically done for the Fylgjukona. For an animal Fylgja, of course, it doesn't really make sense because it's not separate from you, it's not a separate being, it's a part of yourself. So if you started venerating your animal Fylgja, then that would basically mean that you're venerating yourself. But the Fylgjukona, of course, they are guardian spirits of you and your family. So I personally feel like you could venerate them, of course, if you want to do that. As I said, there's not mention of that in the sagas, but I personally feel like if you have some, you could totally include the Fylgjukona, for example, in a disupload, which would be totally cool. And of course, if you want to do it more modernly and you want to just do it, even if you don't have mentions of that in the sagas and in folklore, I guess you can also put some kind of representation for them on your altar and maybe give them offerings. I mean, why not? They're a spirit. They would probably appreciate that. And then lastly, can I incorporate my Fylgja or my Fylgjur into my magical workings? So if you do that kind of stuff, if you are some kind of magical practitioner, can you include them into your workings or ask them to help you with your workings? Again, an animal Fylgja is only a mirror of your character, so doesn't really make sense to include that in your magical workings. Although, I could see, for example, you using a statue or a photo of your animal Fylgja to represent you in a spell. I could see that. But apart from that, not really. I don't think they can help you with that because they're just a part of yourself. But I feel like you can totally work with your Fylgjukona in spell work. For example, since they are guardian spirits, I would personally think that they would be open to help you with protection spells and things like that. Since we also have mentions of them going against the person's enemies, I would also guess that they could help you with hexes and curses. Would make sense for me personally, at least if the hex or the curse is cast for protection. And lastly, I would say you could totally ask them to accompany you while you're doing some kind of trance journeying so that you are protected from any kinds of spirits that you could meet. I mean, they are your guardian spirits, so I feel like that's kind of their job. I don't know. So I feel like those kinds of things would be definitely cases where you could ask them for help. Again, I don't think we have any mentions of that happening in the sagas or in folklore, but I personally think, why not? Like, well, why shouldn't you be able to do that? Try it, and if it works, then it works. And that being said, that is everything that I wanted to cover about the Fylgjur in this video. I really hope that you're happy about this video. I was asked so many times to talk about this topic, and I tried to do as thorough a research as I could because I really wanted to give it justice. And yeah, I didn't want to give out misinformation because I feel like there is so much muddled information about Fylgjur out there. If you have any further questions, if I didn't talk about something that you really want to know, then of course ask in the comments and I will try to answer the questions. Of course, I'm not all-knowing, but I will try my best. I want to, at this point though, shout out my patrons. Thank you so much to SJ, Natasha and Kate Cade, Thistle, Adam, Z, Kent, Brittany, Emer, Celine, Smalkata, Josh, Elinura, David, Christine, Rixie Business, Annalena, Ashley, John, Phoenix, Jenny, Maggie, Misty, Amy, Bethany, Timothy, Coffee, or the honorary Gossip Squirrel, and last but not least, Bjorn. Thank you so much for your support. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up and ring the bell down below so you're notified whenever I upload a new video. Of course, feel free to check out my other socials and my online shop for ethically and sustainably sourced witchcraft and paganism tools. And lastly, of course, if you want to support me on my new Patreon, then feel free to subscribe on there. And with that being said, I will see you in the next video. Bye!